All right, so I'm a little late getting on board tonight, but I was brainstorming and doing a little research to get the last bit of info I needed for getting started here tonight. I know I should probably just sign on when I do these things and then do the work on camera if I'm got work to do, but like I feel sometimes like if I'm doing stuff on camera that I'm oftentimes just like staring at something and not saying or doing anything. So it's not exactly a riveting watch. But um, I'm working my way through the bits of building this game. At this point, I have half the heroes I need. And I think unless I change the fourth one, the 4 that I have right now would all be classed as, I mean, as I set it up right now, would all be the heroines. They'd be the female characters. Now, I haven't decided whether or not I want them to be the heroes or the villains of this set. I almost feel like I don't want to decide. Like I want to leave that up to the players to a certain degree. But I also know that the way I want to do this game is right now I'm coming up with the character cards and the missions and the dice and the mechanics and the world story all together. But kind of want to I feel like the thing I want to do most for this is because they're based on superheroes, I think it would be fun to release comic books of character origin stories, which will establish them as either hero or villainous. I mean, it just sort of has to at a certain point. So I feel like that's going to be done at some point anyway. So I don't feel that it makes sense to leave them ambiguous for gameplay. The thing is, the 4 characters I have so far are moderately monstrous. And so they're more likely to fall through the cracks of the system into a role of having to scrape and survive through less than ideal methods. So they're more likely to be villain characters. But I feel like I could probably split them in half. 2 heroes, 2 out of the 4 women that I have right now. The first one it's a combination of a couple that I had before. I had the sort of prankster, trickster character. And so the first character I had on my list of potential heroes was the prankster, trickster character. I think I was leaning towards male, but I think what I ended up doing was combining that with the person who does the dinosaur forms, and I ended up tweaking it enough so that you have this character who is sort of, I guess, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, a were dinosaur. So they're constantly plagued by being moderately deformed to look somewhat reptilian but still human, but they can fully go a velociraptor. And so her character style for that one tends to lead towards the idea that she will never be somebody that people are comfortable around. And if she wandered into your grocery store, you'd think you were attacked by a monster. You might defend yourself with a weapon, and all she wanted was orange juice. So that kind of character is likely to live in a scenario where the only way they're going to live and survive is by working with other people who don't mind working with a monster. And that's likely to be crooks or mafia or something like that. That doesn't mean the character can't be honorable and good. In that sense, you're more likely to end up with somebody like a Robin Hood, where by definition, they're a robber. They're a brigand. They're a thief, a scoundrel, a Han Solo style character, a smuggler, those types of characters. But I guess the archetype for that is the scoundrel with a heart of gold. And humor would be a crutch for a character like that, where their sense of humor helps mask the struggle and pain of their existence. And then the next character I had on that list was originally marked down as a hero style character. And I had them listed roughly as a man, but so I had this character design here. Let's see, characters. Here we go. So this time around, let's go with the premise of she has changed because of her developing her abilities into a tentacle monster with the ability to become huge or small. So a size changing power for a tentacle monstered girl. The storyline for that one is being a tentacle monster essentially is, I mean, you still have the ability to manipulate tools and do things, so it's not a huge problem, but you're still soft and squishy. So for her protection, she's built herself some armor. And to try to blend in and live a human life, I imagine like a skin suit or a skin, like a rubber costume almost, to be able to blend into the world around her. And then the third character I have here was a special ops, like a Marine or a Navy SEAL, specifically assigned to a task force used to hunt down out of control supers. And their particular knack, his particular knack was understanding mad science gadgets. But on a mission, he was mortally injured and ended up using mad science parts and pieces to rebuild himself. And so he's a cyborg. But an additional twist for that character is that they were in the military under the don't ask, don't tell policies and the anxiety about trans people in the military. So given the chance, he's refabricated himself as a woman and who he wants to be. So it's hard to describe that without getting weird about the topic, but the character is a female cyborg who used to be a special ops monster hunter for the military. And then the fourth character is the person who has the ability to separate their spirit and their body and have them both function. So the body heals, but looks sort of like a drained creature. So they look like a zombie. And the spirit can astral project. So they always look like a ghost or a phantom. So those are the four characters. And they both, all four of them seem best as female characters like that. So I feel like for balance sake, I should consider the possibility of doing 4 male characters that I'm working on. And I think I figured out the name I want to give picking the name for the game itself came down to 3 choices: Paragons, Exemplars, and Luminaries. And Luminaries seemed a little too esoteric. Paragons is nice. Everything I've seen so far as I looked into it suggests that that is used in multiple books or games out there for people with special abilities. And so I feel like it's already been used in this context, that it would get lost or be assumed to be part of a franchise it's not part of. But Exemplars, as far as I could tell, the only thing that shows up for that was some books about missionary roles in and preaching to communities for conversion, kind of. Yeah. And I was like, okay, so that clearly doesn't have a lot out there for the implication that I'm applying it to. So I would be not in a crowded market or a market where it's easy to misunderstand what's going on here. So I do think Exemplars is the one I'm going with at this point. I sort of feel like Paragons would have been nicer, but apparently so did several other people. So it's off the table, I think. And then, so I've got the name. I've got 4 of my 8 characters figured out at this point, which feels like a step backwards because I had 6 and then I combined a couple of them to make a better character out of some of the 4 that I had. But I feel like I should be able to come up with 4 more characters tonight, because after last night, I jumped back into the tinkering around with some of this, and I came up with the scenarios for the missions, and I came up with the world story. So here's where I'm going with the world story. The idea for the world is based on the, like I said, I wanted to build around the idea that becoming a superhero is something that can kind of happen to anybody. I don't want to do this like Star Wars prequels where midichlorians are what make you a superhero, or Jedi or whatever. I don't want to do that crap. It's sort of offensive. And part of the appeal of the original Star Wars was you could become a Jedi. Now you have to have a special quality that you have to be born with in some way to become a Jedi. And that's stupid. Part of the appeal was anybody could be a Jedi if they set their mind to it and could reach out and touch the Force with their practice and training. Like, that to me always seemed better. So the idea I want to go with here is that there have always been potentials among humans throughout history. And those potentials are pretty much everybody. The trick has always been that the thing that makes a potential become an exemplar, in this case, I guess we'll call them that, or that makes a potential break through to become a heroic character, the thing that triggers them may not ever occur in their life. So for a caveman, the odds of being exposed to a new plastic material that causes a reaction in your body that converts you over into a new type of hero, the caveman's never going to encounter a plastic. And so throughout history, our access and exposure to circumstances that cause us to manifest as exemplars have the potential has existed. And to a certain degree, I kind of want to write it as the potential itself is an advantage. So even if you've never emerged as a hero, nothing ever triggers your powers to develop. As a potential, you're more likely to benefit, sort of like you're more likely to reach the edge of human potential through training and skill. So if you apply yourself through discipline and training, you could become a Batman if you never meet the qualifications for the thing that will grant you powers. But we're also living in a time where technology, chemistry, and circumstances that surround us are more likely to trigger us. But throughout history, there have been moments where you get clusters and powerful heroes that come into being. And so they're going to be the heroes of legend and myth. And what's likely to be the instigator for them are war and plague and famines, the horsemen, I guess you would call them, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, essentially. They are instigators of the stressors that push a person beyond their natural limits and risk the chance of becoming empowered in some way. And so that's sort of where I'm going with the idea. So throughout history, you've had, and that sort of thing is more likely to happen in large population centers. So in areas where you have clusters of like Babylon, so you get the heroes of Babylon and that time period. And you have periods like the expansion of Rome or the Qing dynasty or things like that, where you have clustered city states where you get a lot more people in a smaller area. And part of that is sort of a sense of people heterodyning off of each other. If you're closer to, if there's one potential close to you, there's a greater chance that you will become a potential too. If there are three potentials closer to you, you have a greater chance that one of you is going to break through and emerge as an exemplar. And if you have, 6 exemplars within your city, there's a greater chance of becoming a potential or an exemplar yourself. And so as we get closer and clustered closer together, and we have more and more circumstances that cause the emergence and the breakthrough of people from potential to exemplars, then we have an excuse and an understanding of why there have been periods in the past where we have heroic characters, but there's an excuse for why it's happening more and more regularly now. And so that's sort of the model I'm going with. Like you'd have a long period where the plague may have caused the emergence of, like the bubonic plague may have caused the emergence of exemplars out of those who survived the plague, but the thinning out of the population and the emerging dark ages where people may have seen people with special abilities as witches or monsters means that we thinned that population out a little bit. But the world wars and the Spanish flu and all of that happened in the early part of the 1900s, that's an instigator for a new emergence of potentials and a few exemplars, and then the resulting Cold War. And where I'm kind of going with this is the resulting Cold War that resulted from those conflicts. Um, we had in the real world a lot of research going on into remote viewing and psychic powers and those types of things, and so we began to discover more about the potentials and the realization that like exemplars, exemplar heroes, exemplar monsters throughout myth and legend, they seem sparse. And semi-divine characters who are sort of like the peak human at the time, they may or may not become legends. But now that we're looking for people with special abilities post the World Wars and in the Cold War, we're starting to see aspects that make us realize that, oh, there are a lot more people who are potentials. It's entirely possible that everybody's a low grade potential. And through development of those potentials, you can push the edge up to a degree where you could be a heroic character with no powers. But there's also the fact that as we collect these potentials, we are actually clustering them close together again. And like I said, the more you have in an area, the more likely you are to have somebody emerge as an exemplar. And so these government programs to find and draft into the service exemplars and potentials may have been an instigating factor for the continued and more often developing of more potentials and more exemplars. So, with that in mind, we're at a time right now where it's sort of a moderate explosion, but also the fact that there's a lot of want to militarily and governmentally control these characters. And that brings us into a couple of the mission scenarios that I put together. So, what I was looking at for the mission setups was I started to break things down into a couple different categories. So, like heist missions, rescue missions, revenge missions, invasion missions, breakout missions, and fallen heroes. And that's sort of like just the first batch of things I'm looking to play with. And what I built around those themes was 10 missions split into 2 categories of 5 missions total. And one's a hero track and one's a villain track. Now you could potentially, and I may go back over some of those and see if I could reframe the linear story of each 5-card pack to do the opposite. So the first one is sort of starting out with the idea of a petty criminal, somebody who's forced into living below the poverty line and so steals to survive and becomes good enough at it that they're out on a job and they have to go steal something, an artifact of some kind. And so that's one mission. The next mission might be being framed for something, either by somebody stealing your identity or somehow otherwise dealing with that situation. And then the third one, I've used the term terrorist for it, but what it is essentially a massive like personal vendetta and trying to destroy somebody. And in this case, if I'm calling this the villain track, so you're a thief, and then you're framed for something you would never do, And then on top of that, you're now being harassed and attacked on a regular basis by heroes trying to bring you down as the villain that you are. And the fourth one in that one is the realization that the heroes are doing more damage and risking more lives than you ever did. And so the heroes are actually very bad people in this situation. And so you're going to have a point at that point where you're trying to reveal how horrible the hero is behaving in that scenario. And then hopefully by the end of that mission, that the goal is to have that hero fall from grace and end up being a villain. So that the last one of the 5 on this one is that you've sort of been overthrown as a superpowered villain in that setting by this new hero who's gone dark. And you're sort of in this scenario where you have to figure out like how to handle being overthrown as a villain in that area by this hero that's gone villain. And so that's like the villain arc. Now, if there's a way to turn that around so that instead of being a petty thief stealing an artifact, you're a hero stealing a doomsday weapon away from a villain and then being framed for something and then being harassed by, say, military or somebody trying to bring you in for your crimes, and then exposing the conspiracy to frame you, and then defeating an opponent that gets you back into your elevated position again. So there's a way to flip that whole thing, so you could play that arc as a hero or a villain. And so the other story arc that I have here is what I was originally titling the hero arc. And that is a previous champion fell, which is sort of like a hero went evil. And so you're going to be playing the scenario as a hero confronting a fellow hero who has fallen to the dark side, essentially. And then the next mission on that series is the revelation that the military or governments or whatever, even some other heroes, decide that heroes are dangerous and need to be controlled. So they need to be like a branch of the military. They need to be dogs of the government. And that's very much like Civil War in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then the third one is a prison break. So at some point, you've been corralled into these control facilities where you're drafted into a government program and you are no longer a free citizen. You are a tool of the military or the government. And your goal here is to break. And then the fourth one is to rescue a trapped colleague. So it's help freeing another member who's also trapped. And then the fifth one is doing something along the lines of destroying a piece of technology that's potentially dangerous. So maybe something that is used to kill out of control or kill heroes or exemplars who don't abide by those rules. Or maybe it's just destroying a piece of technology that lets you scan and find people who have emerged with powers. So that if you can destroy this device, then nobody knows if you have powers unless you admit to it or show off. And so it gives everybody the chance to just live as people if they choose to. And so that's a hero arc. Is there a way to flip that one? I don't know that one as easily can be converted. So I'm not sure about that one. But so far, that's sort of where I am with some of the brainstorming tonight. So I've got my 4 heroines. I have my linear story pieces that are 5 mission cards long each, but those mission cards can be pulled apart and used to make modular different storylines. I have brainstormed up a few other ideas for types of mission cards that I didn't use there. So that's room for things in expansion packs. I sort of walked away from the idea of setting up factions for the heroes yet. I may revisit that as I go into it further, so that I could have like when I do the backstories of the characters as like a comic or an animation or something, I'd like to be able to tell the stories. And of course, they're going to pick sides and reveal if they're villainous or heroic or whatever. Got the world building pretty much worked out right now. I've got the history from, the rough outline of how things have happened. I think key moments that have occurred since the 1960s into modern day. I haven't really said, like, in 1980 there was a huge conflict that resulted in a treaty that prevents use of powered individuals on the battlefield in combat, or something like that. I don't know where that fits in yet, if it fits in at all. But roughly, I know that since the end of the World War and since the Cold War, we've been playing around with finding and discovering emerging powers and wanting them to be part of, sort of drafted into government service. I've got that kind of lined out, and I do sort of feel that there's room for a little bit of the mistrust of people with powers, even if they're heroic, as part of the story. Because I feel like if you have a world with people with powers, there are always going to be those without powers who are going to be anxious and not trust people more powerful than them. I mean, we already have it right now where don't trust the police, don't trust the government. People are paranoid about everybody's out to get them. The Illuminati are out there. Like, whether or not you believe in any of that, the fact that people think that's something out there in a world where we don't have people with powers tells me that in a world where we do have people with powers, people are always going to question the motivation and the loyalties of anybody with more power than them and mistrust them to use that power in the interest of the community or themselves. And so there's going to be some amount of that, but I don't think I want to do it to a degree where it's sort of been outlawed to be heroic. I think the thing that makes the most sense is if you have a world with people with powers, they have to get either like a privatized license to practice using their abilities, or they have to enlist with teams, which will be like a local militia. And the teams will keep a record of who's doing what for whatever. I feel like those are both relatively reasonable expectations that a world with people with powers would try to enforce. And of course, you're just going to have some people, gangsters, or not even necessarily like gangsters or gangs, but some people who do not want to be part of a registry of people with powers, and some people who do not wish to be enlisted into a sort of a paramilitary organization. So I can easily see that you would still have some freelance individuals. And they would be sort of, I feel like that kind of person would be treated to a certain degree very similar to the way J. Jonah Jameson in Marvel Comics, the publisher of the Bugle, handles Spider-Man. You know, he's a masked vigilante. He's a terror in New York City. I feel like anybody who's doing the heroic thing solo runs the risk of being seen as a dangerous recluse or a loose cannon, at least. And some people might see them as heroic, and they may do heroic things, but there's always going to be a question of like, why wouldn't they commit themselves to a hero force or get a license to do this? So there's always going to be a little bit of that sense of things. So I think that makes the most sense for the world. I've got to see if I can bang out some male characters and then really kind of decide whether or not my tentacle monster girl and my tentacle monster girl, my zombie girl, and my zombie ghost girl, and my cyborg girl. I don't know which of those would be villainous and which would be heroic. So I got to figure out where I'm going with some of that. Most of that, like, I don't have to decide for early gameplay, but when I get to the point where I do a comic or an animation or something like that for the origin stories of the characters, I'm going to eventually have to make the decision on that one. But at this point, I'm just sort of waiting on the game completion is waiting on me to set up the specific mission cards with the right number of challenges to overcome and the boss of that level, and finish up the 4 remaining characters of the set. But I think other than that, I think and I got to do some artifacts, some gadgets. But that'll depend heavily on the characters. So, like a gadget for each of the characters, either something they would have or something that affects them in a certain way. Those would be the important ones. So like the dinosaur girl, her biggest struggle is that she could A, not speak, so she has to use sign language, and B, can never look fully human. So a gadget for her might be a holographic projector that gives a fully human appearance to her. And that would be hugely valuable to someone like her. But in gameplay factors, I'm not sure where that would play for affecting missions. I don't think that it would overall affect missions overly much. So, I mean, that doesn't make sense to build it as a gadget. So, yeah, I got to work on gadgets, 4 more characters, and the specifics of each mission card. So, like, how many henchmen or guards at the prison that you're trying to escape from. Those types of things. Ugh. Ah, wow, we got all the way to 40 minutes when we just going at it. So that's sort of where I am on the game right now. Having a bit of a fun building up the world, which I think we've got mostly squared away. Now it's building up the last few characters and then building gadgets for gameplay. I think the gadgets will probably be more targeted around the individual missions they may be applicable to. We have 10 missions, 10 gadgets. Seems fair. Alrighty, so that's where I am. I think if there are no more questions or ideas, I think I'm going to call it for tonight. It seems like I did some looking on my videos. I noticed at some point last night you got kicked off. I don't think that was on my end, because as near as I can tell in my archives, the video from last night ran a full 46 minutes, and that's what it still tells me it did. I have not tried to watch it. I saw your comment. Do I have aspirins on hand at all times? No. I take it that's a comment about having headaches from trying to keep track of it all? No. This is what my brain does on its own. If given time to sit quietly, this is what my brain would do without me stopping it. So this isn't so much a headache, and I have to admit, I have a blast coming up with these backstories, these character designs, and these world building, and I can fully imagine I'm going to have a blast coming up with superhero gadgets for this as well. My biggest frustration in doing things like this is it's hard for me to get people together to do a playtest run. So like I can have all the rules worked out in my head. I can have all the cards. I could even have amazing art done for this and sit down and try to play it out. And I'll get some feedback from myself playing against myself, but it's not quite the same as, you know, 4 other people. You just hand them the game and see what problems they encounter trying to figure out how to play the game. I mean, of course, you include a card with instructions of how the game is played, but to me, it always makes perfect sense because I'm the one who thought it up and I know what I mean when I say such and such. But the real key is, can other people play it without you answering questions about how to play it? And that's hard to get to happen for me because so many of my friends are busy with their own projects, or most of my family, or half of my friends and most of my family don't care about board games. They don't care about video games, and they're not interested in science fiction or fantasy concepts. So it's sort of like anything that I do, they don't care about. And so getting anybody to help me play this, like the first game that I ever created, the Runcible food game that I made, I had that game. I've had that game produced for, I want to say, 3 or 4 years. I mean, and by produced, I mean I had a deck of cards made to play it with, and I haven't put it out, and I need to do better artwork. But past that, it's ready to play. And I was like, I wanted to introduce it to my family because it's not overly science fiction. It's not fantasy. It's not, a complex narrative game. It's just a simple, fun game you can have with friends and family. But it took me a year and a half to get any of my family to play with me. And it took another 8 months to get another member of my family to play with me. I managed to get a group of friends to play it a couple times early on, but that's back when we had a group that got together to play test games. And most of those people have moved on. They've gone on to other jobs and they've disappeared. So you get headaches or migraines often? Is that the situation you got there? Because I rarely get headaches. When I do get a headache, it's a mind bender. It's the kind of thing that leaves me curled up on the floor. But I get maybe one or two of those a year. Um, so I don't usually have to worry about that. And when I do get them, I I know that at least certain members of my family used to resort to. Oh, I will say that when I did let's see, I tried to what the first year of doing some of the creative stuff I did, I was doing some writing, and I wrote 70,000 words on a novel and a half in 30 days for National Novel Writing Month while working a job, and I had to go to a computer lab to do it at the university I was at. I used to work at a university, so I was working at the university, and I'd leave and I'd go to the computer labs because I didn't have a computer of my own. And so you'd work a shift, you'd be exhausted by the end of your shift. I'd head over to the computer labs, and then I'd bang away until they closed up at midnight and just try to knock out a 50,000 word novel, and ended up doing 75,000 words. Hit the end of that month, and I'm like, I did it. I'm super excited. But my brain also feels like Play Doh. But here's the thing, as soon as I was done writing, I hit the end of the month and I wasn't writing anymore. Like, it took me about a day to recuperate, and I was still feeling a little like, whew, I just ran a marathon. But my brain kept going like, ooh, here's another idea. And so I just started going like, oh wow, I've kicked myself into high gear. I've exercised the muscle enough that it wants to exercise more. And the more I did that kind of thing, the more I got into the like doing more and exploring more and playing more. And once I've learned how to do certain techniques and to space them well and to engage them in ways that are interesting to me, like I don't I don't feel as worn out as often. I think the hardest thing for me sometimes is the drudge work involved in some of this. So like it's part of the reason why like doing these live videos is easy for me. Doing the edited ones where I have to go and spend an hour and a half moving data around on something that I already did. As far as my brain is concerned, I already read the book. I already reviewed the book. I'm done. But I'm not done because I've got another hour and a half worth of work to edit the video right. And I was like, oh. And I need to find a way to play with my brain so that I can get fascinated and interested in the creative aspect of the editing. Because I know once I get to that point of it, I can just keep going. But editing has always been one of those things I don't like. I got to figure out a way to make it something I do like because it's an integral part of what I'm doing on most of this. And so that and the marketing. I don't like doing the marketing aspect of it either. I find that hard to do. But yeah, I honestly like the fun thing about this is like even when I'm doing like the stuff I'm doing for this game, I'm maybe spending, well, let's be fair. I was going to say I'm spending about 2 or 3 hours max per day, but some of that is really just sort of like I don't even notice that I'm spending the time doing it. Like I'm driving to the grocery store to get groceries this afternoon. And while I'm doing that and wandering around the grocery store, I'm thinking like, okay, so what are some of the words that mean heroic or powerful or whatever that I can use for a title for the game? So I'm brainstorming as I'm wandering around doing the things I need to get. And then while driving there and back, I'm brainstorming up character ideas and gadget ideas. I'm tweaking a little bit of the world history. And those are just things my brain will do if I give it something to play with while I'm doing the regular tasks in my daily life. But, actually sitting down and doing the focused work, I would say, like, during the course of this video, this amount of time is about what I can put about this amount of time during the day at a keyboard, just kind of like, okay, sorting out the details, building a chart of the different power sets and doing that, and just organizing, like playing around, like sorting my Skittles or M&Ms by color. I don't mind a little bit of that, and I can put about an hour to an hour and a half into that before I hit a point where I'm like, I'm going to go do something else for a little bit. But yeah, I don't feel like any of this has been work, and I feel like, honestly, if I look at the amount of time that went into this today, I'm gonna say maybe an hour 45 to 2 hours and 15 minutes, somewhere in that range is what I put into it today. And last night I probably put 2.5 hours into some of the world design and some of the character design aspects. But that's sort of like, to me, that's time for my own entertainment. So, like, I know my mother watches a certain amount of TV every day. Actually, most of the people in my life watch a certain amount of TV. I watch maybe an hour and a half of YouTube sometimes, but there are days that I never watch any YouTube. I'll go a day, 2 days, 3 days sometimes and never watch any YouTube, or just 15 to 20 minutes of YouTube, and then I'm done for the day. The rest of my entertainment time, where, like, so many people I know spend 2 to 3 hours on TV every night, for me, that's playtime. That's me playing on this thing, coming up with ideas, projects, concepts, designs, playing with them and imagining how I can take them and do this, that, and that with all of them. Like, I love to do stuff like that. So for me, it's fun. Alrighty, I think that's where I'm going to call it for tonight. Tomorrow's the last night of dice game design, so I don't imagine I'll have a full-blown finished game. I will still have to do some play testing, and this one's going to be very important for this game. Play testing is going to be more important for this game than other games, because for most of the other games, it's hard to do something wrong. But this one, the mechanics have to work just right, and they have to be balanced just right. And so that's going to take a little play testing. But so I'm thinking at least by the end of summer, I should have some playable demos for some of these. I've actually thought about doing a series of videos at the end of the year where I show off all the things that I've made this year. So all the games get a play test and a video. All the products get a demo. All the books get a sample read or something like that, and the recipes could be collated into ebooks or whatever. And I want to kind of just summarize it all up at the end of the year, because I think that would be a fun project to do. But yeah, that's just my way of saying, like, this game's not going to be done Saturday night, but most of the work will have been done this week. And then after tomorrow night, Sunday night, we have product design starting, I think. And then the first week of July will be foods, and then videos. And then was that book? And then I can't even remember anymore. I'll have to look it up. But Sunday starts product design. I got to figure out what I'm going to do for that. I think I had an idea the other day and then I completely forgot what it was. See, I'm getting a little bit older to the point where I've got so much going on, I need to write it down to keep track of it. And I don't always do that, so I lose track of certain things. But I will see if I can remember. I will see you tomorrow. Take care and have a good night. Alrighty, so there's there.